Before we dive into this secret that could have changed the entire course of World War II, pause for just a moment. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because here, history isn't just told, it's lived. Every chapter uncovers the hidden battles, the untold sacrifices, and the moments that shaped our world. Don't miss the next revelation. Subscribe now. The night the war tilted. The world was at war, but on this night in 1941, far from the thunder of tanks and the roar of bombers, a silence more dangerous than gunfire held its breath. So secret, fragile, terrifying, and powerful enough to shift the balance of the entire conflict, lay hidden inside a single briefcase, carried under the arm of a trembling man who knew he might not live to see morning. The man's name was Wilhelm Kappel. To the world, he was just another German officer, a loyal cog in Hitler's relentless war machine. But inside his coat, beating faster than his terrified heart, he carried documents that revealed what no one outside the Nazi inner circle was meant to know: the progress of Germany's most dangerous project. A project so vast in scope and ambition that, if completed, it would make every other weapon of war look like a child's toy. He hurried through the Berlin night, glancing over his shoulder with every echo of boots on the cobblestone. The Gestapo was everywhere, watching, listening. One mistake, one shadow out of place, and his life would end in a cellar before dawn. Yet Kappel pressed on, for what he carried was not just information. It was a chance, perhaps the only chance, to stop Hitler from wielding a weapon that could enslave the world. Across Europe, men and women fought, bled and died in trenches, in ruined cities, in skies filled with fire. But few of them knew that in secret laboratories and hidden compounds, German scientists were chasing the most devastating idea ever conceived, splitting the atom to create a bomb of unimaginable power. It was an idea whispered in halls of science, dismissed by some as fantasy, but now, in Hitler's hands, it was becoming terrifyingly real. Kappel had seen the blueprints, the research notes, the equations scrawled across chalkboards. He had seen the shipments of uranium quietly moved under cover of darkness. He had listened to the pride, the arrogance, of men who believed they were about to hand Hitler a godlike weapon. And in that moment, Kappel had made a choice. He could remain silent, safe, obedient, or he could risk everything to get the secret into the hands of those who might stop it. The briefcase was heavy, not with metal or paper, but with the weight of history. If he succeeded, the Allies might gain the knowledge they needed to prevent disaster. If he failed, Hitler's Reich might hold the power to end the war with a single terrible strike. The world did not know it yet, but on this dark night in Berlin, the future of humanity rested in the hands of one frightened man running through the shadows. The double agent's gamble. The rain fell in sheets as Wilhelm Kappel boarded the midnight train out of Berlin, his hat pulled low, his collar raised high. To the other passengers, he was just another officer on duty, perhaps traveling to inspect troops or carry orders. But inside that briefcase, strapped tight to his wrist, was the kind of truth that could bring down empires. Kappel was no ordinary officer. He was a double agent. For months he had lived with two faces, one loyal to the Reich, the other quietly whispering across borders to men and women, sworn to see Hitler defeated. Every handshake, every glance, every coded word hidden in mundane reports had been part of a dangerous dance with death. Now with these documents, the dance had turned into a sprint across a minefield. The papers inside revealed more than progress on the uranium project. They showed locations of secret facilities, names of scientists, shipments disguised as coal deliveries, and the chilling confirmation that Hitler's ambitions went beyond tanks, beyond aircraft, beyond the rockets already raining down on London. If the Allies did not act, Germany could be the first to unleash a weapon so destructive it would turn cities into ash in seconds. The whistle of the train cut through the night, and with it came Kappel's rising fear. Gestapo agents boarded at every stop, scanning faces, checking identification papers. One officer lingered too long on Kappel's documents, his cold eyes searching for cracks. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Kappel's pulse thundered in his ears. The officer finally stamped the papers, returning them without a word. Kappel exhaled, his hand trembling as it brushed the briefcase. Hours later, In a dimly lit cafe near the Swiss border, Kappel waited. Every tick of the clock above the bar hammered against his ribs. The rendezvous was set with precision. He would meet a contact, pass the case, and vanish back into the shadows before the Reich even realized what had slipped through its fingers. But spies live on suspicion, and doubt gnawed at him. What if his contact had been caught? What if this was a trap? Then the door opened. A woman stepped inside, her coat soaked, her eyes sharp and unflinching. She walked straight past him, paused at the counter, and ordered coffee with too much sugar. The signal. Relief surged through Kappel. Their paths crossed, hands brushed, and for a heartbeat, the weight of the briefcase passed from him to her. The gamble had been made. But as the woman left, blending into the night, Kappel knew the danger was only beginning. Secrets that powerful never stayed hidden for long, and the Reich would soon discover one of its own had betrayed it. The secret reaches the Allies. Snow fell softly over the Swiss city of Geneva, muting the clatter of trams and the voices of hurried pedestrians. Inside a modest townhouse near the lake, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Around a wooden table sat 3 men in heavy coats, their faces drawn with the weight of war. They were British intelligence officers, summoned in haste, and now they waited for the courier, who claimed to carry a truth that could decide the fate of nations. The door creaked open. The woman stepped inside, her boots wet from the snow, her eyes flicking to every shadow as if expecting betrayal. She carried nothing in her hands, but under her coat was the briefcase Wilhelm Kappel had risked his life to deliver. Without a word, she set it on the table, her expression carved from stone. The men leaned forward, their breaths shallow. With careful fingers, one officer snapped open the locks. Papers spilled across the wood, blueprints, diagrams, chemical formulas, maps marked with coded symbols. For a long, terrible moment, the room was silent, but for the sound of pages turning. Then, the eldest of the men, a seasoned MI6 officer named Sir Alistair Kane, looked up, his face pale. "My God," he whispered, "they're building it." The words hung in the air like smoke. The documents told a story more frightening than any nightmare. German scientists, some of the brightest minds in Europe, were harnessing the atom. The research was crude but undeniable. If given time, resources, and Hitler's relentless will, the Nazis could craft a weapon that would obliterate entire cities with a single strike. It was not fantasy. It was fact. One officer slammed his fist against the table. If this is true, London is already in the crosshairs. New York, Moscow, no city is safe. But for all the panic, there was also a spark of grim determination. The Allies now had a chance, not just to prepare, but to strike at the heart of Hitler's secret. The question was how. Messages were dispatched that very night, across the Channel, in the war rooms of London. Winston Churchill would soon be briefed. Across the Atlantic, cables would reach Washington, where President Roosevelt faced the monumental task of weighing fact against fear. As the woman slipped back into the Geneva night, leaving the briefcase behind, the officers knew they held in their hands not just paper, but the future of the war. If they acted swiftly, they might prevent catastrophe. If they faltered, the world could descend into a darkness from which it might never emerge. And somewhere in Berlin, Wilhelm Kappel waited, never knowing if the gamble he had taken would save humanity or doom it. Churchill's dilemma. The war room beneath Whitehall was a cavern of maps and cigarette smoke, lit by the glow of lamps that cast long shadows on the walls. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Britain, sat hunched over a thick folder stamped Top E, Secret. His cigar smoldered in his hand, forgotten as his eyes scanned the pages that had crossed through Switzerland, carried by strangers who had risked their lives for a single truth. The room was quiet but for the scratching of pens and the faint ticking of a clock. Around him, his closest advisers waited, restless, their nerves taut as piano wires. The documents spread before them left no room for doubt. Hitler's scientists were chasing the atom bomb, and they were closer than anyone had feared. Churchill leaned back, exhaling a long plume of smoke. His voice, gravelly yet commanding, broke the silence. "If the Hun succeeds," he muttered, "London may not survive the first demonstration." An uneasy murmur rippled across the table. One minister slammed his fist. We must strike the facilities at once. Bomb them, sabotage them, send in every agent we have. But others urged caution. The intelligence was chilling, yes, but incomplete. Was Germany truly on the brink? Or was this another phantom, designed to lure precious resources away from the front lines? And even if the information was genuine, how could Britain, already strained to its breaking point, hope to stop an empire's secret laboratories scattered across occupied Europe? Churchill rose from his chair, pacing, his footsteps echoing in the underground chamber. He knew what was at stake. The German Blitz had already scarred London with fire and rubble. He had seen children carried from the ruins, the hollow eyes of mothers in the shelters. If Hitler acquired a weapon that could flatten entire cities with a single strike, Britain might not stand a chance. He paused by the wall map of Europe, his gaze fixed on a red pin marking Berlin. Kappel's documents suggested that somewhere in the Reich, scientists were racing against time. Finally, Churchill turned, his jaw set with iron resolve. "We cannot gamble with hesitation," he declared. "This is not merely about Britain. This is about civilization itself. We must act swiftly, and we must bring the Americans fully into this fight." The decision was made. Messages would be sent across the Atlantic. The shadow of the atom had now reached the White House, and as Churchill extinguished his cigar, his mind was already on the next question. Could the Allies move faster than Hitler's scientists, or were they already too late? Roosevelt's burden. The Oval Office was cloaked in the soft glow of desk lamps, the winter wind rattling against the windows. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt sat in his wheelchair, his hands clasped tightly on the armrests, his usually calm demeanor weighed down by the folder that now lay before him. It had traveled across oceans, carried by couriers and cables, stamped with the highest secrecy. Inside was the nightmare he had long feared. Across the room, General George Marshall and scientist Vannevar Bush stood silently, watching the president absorb the words. Uranium chain reaction. Weapon of unprecedented destructive power. The Nazis were racing to build a bomb unlike anything the world had ever seen. And if they succeeded first, it would not be London, Moscow, or Paris alone in danger. America itself could face annihilation. Roosevelt's cigarette trembled faintly in his hand. For months, he had received whispers from his scientific advisors, letters from Albert, Einstein and other émigrés, physicists warning that the splitting of the atom was no longer theoretical. But now the evidence was undeniable. Hitler's war machine was moving toward the unthinkable. Marshall broke the silence. "Mr. President, if the Germans succeed, they could dictate the terms of peace or obliterate those who resist. Britain would fall. The Soviets would crumble, and we—" He hesitated. "We would be next." Roosevelt wheeled closer to the desk, his face carved with determination. "And if we pursue this weapon ourselves, can we succeed before them?" Vannevar Bush, the quiet scientist with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "It will demand resources unlike any project in history. Money, manpower, secrecy. We would need to gather the greatest minds alive, build facilities in the deserts, the mountains, places no enemy spy could penetrate. It will not be quick. And it will not be cheap." The room felt colder, the shadows heavier. Roosevelt closed the folder, his mind racing. He knew the risks. Pouring America's strength into such a project would mean sacrifices elsewhere, ships not built, planes not produced, divisions not equipped. And yet, to ignore the warning was to gamble with the survival of the free world. At last he spoke, his voice steady, carrying the weight of destiny. "We cannot wait for Hitler to decide the future. If he pursues the atom, then so shall we, and we must not fail." The decision was sealed. From that moment, the United States would commit itself to the most secretive, ambitious scientific project in history, a project soon to be known as the Manhattan Project. But as Roosevelt gave the order, a chilling question lingered. Was America racing to save the world, or to unleash its darkest weapon? The race against time. In laboratories scattered across the globe, a silent race began, one that would determine not only the outcome of the war, but the fate of civilization itself. In Germany, behind high fences and guarded gates, brilliant physicists worked under the watchful eye of the Reich. They calculated experimented and argued furiously, driven by a mix of ambition and fear. To succeed meant glory and power beyond imagination. To fail meant explaining themselves to men in black. Uniforms whose patience ended in firing squads. Uranium ore was shipped under cover of darkness, and reactors were assembled in secret facilities. Each discovery brought them closer to unlocking the atom's destructive heart. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States launched its own colossal gamble. The Manhattan Project was born in whispers and shadows, spreading across vast landscapes, hidden in the deserts of New Mexico, the mountains of Tennessee, the plains of Washington. Entire towns sprang up overnight, cloaked in secrecy, their residents forbidden to speak of the work they did. Thousands of scientists, soldiers, and workers became part of a machine, whose purpose was known to only a handful of men. At its core were some of the greatest minds of the century: Robert Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, Niels Bohr, many of them refugees who had fled the Nazis, now working desperately to ensure Hitler never achieved the power they themselves were racing to harness. Chalkboards filled with furious equations, experiments hissed and smoked behind reinforced walls. Every day was a step toward a weapon that would either save the world or destroy it. But the race was not only about science. It was about espionage, sabotage, and trust. Allied intelligence agents risked their lives behind enemy lines, tracking shipments of uranium, infiltrating laboratories, gathering whispers of German progress. Resistance fighters derailed trains, intercepted letters, and sometimes paid with their lives for scraps of information. Each fragment painted a picture, sometimes alarming, sometimes reassuring but never complete. The tension was unbearable. In Washington and London, officials pored over intelligence reports, always haunted by the same question: how close were the Germans? Some argued the Reich was on the brink of success. Others claimed their efforts were disorganized, slowed by shortages and rivalries. But no one could be sure. And uncertainty was the most dangerous enemy of all. Every sunrise felt like a countdown. Every rumor of German advancement sent shockwaves through Allied war rooms. The clock was ticking, and neither side knew who would reach the finish line first. And in the shadows, Wilhelm Kappel remained in Berlin, living a double life, feeding scraps of information to the Allies, praying that his betrayal would tip the balance before the secret weapon was unleashed. The spy who knew too much. Berlin, 1943. The city pulsed with paranoia. Every street corner held the echo of boots. Every shadow seemed to hide an informant. Every whisper could be your last. For Wilhelm Kappel, life had become a razor's edge. Each day he wore the uniform of loyalty, but beneath it beat the heart of a traitor. And each secret he carried in his memory was another weight dragging him closer to discovery. By now, Kappel had fed the Allies critical details, progress reports, names of leading scientists, hints about uranium shipments moving through occupied territories. But with every passing month, the Gestapo's eyes grew sharper. They had begun to suspect leaks. Agents vanished. Officers were interrogated. Rumors spread of traitors being dragged to cellars and never emerging. Kappel knew it was only a matter of time before suspicion fell upon him. He tried to remain ordinary, his salute crisp, his reports flawless. Yet inside fear gnawed at him. Every knock at his door in the night, every sudden order to report to headquarters, every glance from a superior felt like the moment his mask would shatter. Then came the most dangerous task yet. Through a coded message slipped into an innocuous report, the Allies requested confirmation of something extraordinary. Evidence that the Germans had tested components of a bomb in a secluded forest facility. If true, it meant the Reich was closer than anyone dared believe. To uncover the truth, Kappel arranged a visit under official pretenses, claiming he was conducting an audit. The facility was a bleak compound hidden in pine woods, its buildings cold and sterile. Inside, he glimpsed chalkboards littered with equations, rooms humming with strange machinery, and a laboratory where technicians in white coats handled metal canisters with gloves as thick as armor. He dared not linger, dared not ask too many questions. But he saw enough, too much. The pieces fit together. The Nazis were still far from a completed bomb, but they were dangerously close to unlocking the puzzle. Close enough to terrify him. Returning to Berlin, Capel penned his findings in code, concealed in what appeared to be a dull logistics report. The information made its way through couriers across borders into Allied hands, but in doing so he had drawn too near to the fire. Whispers reached him, quiet hints that the Gestapo was circling, that an investigation was underway. His comrade's eyes lingered longer than before. His name had surfaced on a list. He had given the Allies their most vital clue yet, but in doing so, Wilhelm Capel had sealed his own fate. He knew too much, and in Nazi Germany, men who knew too much did not live long. The Gestapo closes in. Berlin was a city of whispers and footsteps in the dark. The air itself seemed heavy with suspicion, and for Wilhelm Capel, every breath tasted like dread. He had spent months threading the needle between loyalty and betrayal, but now the needle was snapping. The Gestapo was closing in. It began with questions, a casual inquiry about his travel records, a request to review his reports. Nothing overtly threatening, yet Capel recognized the pattern. The Gestapo never struck without warning. They let the fear simmer first, let the suspect sweat under the weight of invisible eyes. And it was working. One evening, as he left headquarters, he noticed two men in long coats lingering at the corner, their gaze never quite leaving him. Another time his flat was entered while he was at work. Nothing stolen, nothing moved, except for a single drawer left slightly open. A message, "We are watching." Still he pressed on. He knew the Allies needed confirmation of his latest report. But each attempt to pass information felt like playing chess with death. Every move calculated, every misstep fatal. He met couriers in crowded markets, hard-coded notes inside wine shipments, even whispered fragments in the chaos of train stations. Yet the walls were closing in faster than he could move. The final warning came in the form of silence. A colleague, a fellow officer, who had once shared cigarettes with him was suddenly gone. No transfer, no farewell, just an empty desk and a rumor that he had been taken in the night. The next day, Capel was summoned to Gestapo headquarters for routine questioning. The building loomed like a fortress of fear, its stone walls swallowing the weak. Inside, corridors echoed with the sound of boots and the muffled cries from behind locked doors. Capel was led into a stark room, a single lamp glaring down on him. The officer across the table smiled without warmth, his voice soft but sharp as a blade. "Tell me, Herr Capel," the man said, sliding papers across the table. "You've been very thorough in your reports, almost too thorough. Where do you find the time for such detail?" Capel's throat tightened. He forced a smile, reciting rehearsed lines about loyalty, efficiency, and service to the Reich. Every word felt like walking a tightrope above a pit. He could not falter. The interrogation stretched for hours. Questions looped back, contradictions probed. His nerves flayed raw. At last they released him, but not with freedom, with a leash. The Gestapo did not need to arrest a man immediately. Sometimes it was far more effective to let him know he was marked. And now Wilhelm Capel lived each day knowing the hunters were at his heels. The final transmission. The night was cold, the Berlin sky shrouded in low clouds that muted the moon. Wilhelm Capel sat alone in his flat, the blinds drawn tight, the briefcase gone, the walls pressing in. The Gestapo's shadow was everywhere now. He could hear it in the echo of footsteps outside, feel it in the way neighbors avoided his eyes, taste it in the bitter silence that lingered after the phone, rang and then clicked dead. He had one chance left. The Allies needed everything he knew, every detail, every name, every weakness. If he vanished tomorrow, his sacrifice had to mean something. From beneath a loose floorboard, Capel pulled out a small radio set, its wires coiled like veins, its dials worn from trembling hands. He had avoided using it for months. Too risky, too easy to trace. But tonight he had no choice. He tuned the frequency carefully, the static crackling like gunfire in the stillness. Sweat trickled down his back as he began to tap, sending coded bursts into the night. His message was desperate. Hurried confirmation of German progress. The names of leading scientists, coordinates of secret facilities. And finally his warning, they are close, too close. Each tap of the key felt like a heartbeat. He imagined Allied officers in London or Geneva, huddled over receivers, straining to catch his words. He imagined them understanding the urgency, acting before it was too late. But then silence. The receiver hissed, the line went dead. Something was wrong. A sound cut through the quiet. Boots on the stairwell. Heavy, deliberate, climbing closer. Capel froze. His fingers hovered over the radio, his breath caught in his chest. He knew this moment would come, yet the finality of it struck him like ice. He had risked everything, but had he sent enough? Did his words make it through the static, across the borders, into Allied hands? Or had his last message been swallowed by the night? The knock came, sharp and merciless. Open up, Gestapo. Capel's mind raced. The radio sat exposed on the table. The code book lay open beside it. There was no escape, no time to hide. He closed his eyes for a moment, forcing himself to breathe. Then, in one swift motion, he shoved the radio into the fireplace, smashing it against the iron grate. Sparks flew, wires twisted, glass shattered. Flames licked at the remnants. The door burst open. Black uniforms filled the room, pistols raised, eyes cold. Wilhelm Capel straightened his back, meeting their gaze with the last flicker of defiance he could muster. Whatever came next, he had given the world its final warning. The secret that never died. The cell was dark, damp, and silent, but for the drip of water echoing from unseen cracks. Wilhelm Capel sat on a wooden bench, his hands bound, his body broken from hours of interrogation. The Gestapo had taken everything from him, his freedom, his dignity, his future. But there was one thing they could never be sure of, whether the message he had sent had made it through. Capel held onto that thought like a dying flame in the night. He did not fear death now. He feared irrelevance. If his words had reached the Allies, then perhaps his life, his betrayal would mean something greater than his own survival. Days blurred into nights. He heard the muffled cries of other prisoners, the sharp reports of gunshots in distant courtyards, the laughter of guards echoing down the corridor. He knew his time was running out. And then one morning the footsteps came for him. No trial, no last words, only the cold air of dawn and the silent courtyard where shadows fell across the wall. As the rifles were raised, Capel stood straighter than he had in months. He whispered a prayer, not for himself but for the world he would never see. Then the shots rang out and Wilhelm Capel was gone. But his secret did not die with him. Across Europe, Allied officers pored over his final transmission. The message had been received, fragmented, incomplete, but enough. It confirmed what they feared most. Germany's atomic ambitions were real. It fueled new urgency within the Manhattan Project, sparking furious debates in Washington, London, and Los Alamos. Could the Allies reach the finish line before Hitler's scientists? They had no choice. History would tell the outcome. The Nazis, plagued by shortages, rivalries, and miscalculations, never completed their bomb. The Allies, driven by fear and determination, succeeded first, testing their weapon in the desert sands of New Mexico, then unleashing it in Japan to end the war. Yet hidden in the shadows of history is the story of a man who never lived to see that end. Wilhelm Capel's name was erased by the Reich, his memory buried beneath rubble and ash, but his choice, his impossible gamble, echoed across time. One man, caught between loyalty and conscience, had carried the secret that almost changed World War II forever. And even now, as the world lives under the shadow of the atom, his ghost lingers, a reminder of the razor's edge, between survival and destruction, and of the courage it takes to defy the darkness when the world hangs in the balance. The war ended. But the secret never truly died. Wilhelm Capel's secret may have vanished into the shadows, but his courage still echoes through time. If you are gripped by this journey into history's hidden turning points, make sure to subscribe. Join us as we uncover more secrets, more betrayals, and more moments where a single choice altered the fate of nations. The past is alive, and the next chapter awaits you here.